We're going to give another few seconds to allow others to get back to join us. Uh, Good afternoon and welcome back to the second half of the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee's second public meeting. At this time, we will continue with our agenda. Next on the agenda, the Open Government Secretary will provide a NAP6 timeline overview. With that, I will turn the meeting back over to the chair, Daniel Schumann.
Great, thank you, Arthur. Alexis and Dan York, you're recognized. I'd love for you to talk through the timeline. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Hey, everyone. It is good to be back to present to you all again. So as was just said, we've been requested to go back over the NAP6 development timeline that I presented at your first meeting, just as a refresher, and then to have room for discussion. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you. So as we all know, the U.S. is currently implementing its fifth Open Government National Action Plan, which expires at the end of this month. So we are now talking in terms of just days left. And we are going to follow the Open Government Partnership Guidelines for the creation and delivery of the next NAP. And the graphic you see here, which I showed you last time, this comes directly from the Open Government Partnership National Handbook, and it displays that plans that end on December 31st can be delivered to OGP and begin implementation anytime between July 1st and February 28th. However, I want to remind you that the OGP rules also say that if a participating government does not deliver a new action plan within 1 year after the completion of their previous action plan, they will be officially late. So that means we have until the end of December 2025 to deliver NAP6 and not be counted as late. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide walks through the proposed NAP6 development timeline. You might remember that these 6 gears at the top, these also come from the OGP National Handbook, and they show the 6-part NAP development process that they've created. And what we've done is we've mapped our 6 steps of the notional timeline, again, with the goal of having NAP6 created and over to OGP by the end of December next year. So the first 3 steps, analyzing inputs, defining the problem, and identifying solutions, those are all taking place now and through the end of the calendar year. So as part of these processes, we've been engaging with agencies and with the public in various meetings, and through the NAP6 request for information we released in September to collect ideas and recommendations. And as an aside, you might have seen that I'll be going over an overview of the feedback we received later on in this call. So after this part is done and we have a good sense for the commitments we think should be in the next NAP, we will begin the drafting phase, and that's the orange bar that runs from January through the end of May 2025. We then have the bright blue bar that goes from June through the end of September 2025, and this represents the time period where we expect to have a solid draft that we share with the public, civil society, and other stakeholders for feedback, and then have sort of a back and forth on what changes might be needed to go into the final draft. Here, I also want to bring up, as a reminder, I mentioned last time and want to emphasize again that there are going to be multiple opportunities for the public and for civil society to engage throughout this entire process. Those include, just as examples, responding to our previous RFI, attending meetings held by the FAC here, and as well as other public meetings that the Secretariat might hold, and then providing feedback when the draft is released next year. And there will also be multiple instances where the government will share our thoughts and responses, and those will not just be limited exclusively to this one segment of the timeline. Getting back to the timeline here, the green bar, that represents when we hope to finalize and publish NAP6, and we have it here in October and November of 2025. So as I've been saying, our target is to have NAP6 delivered to OGP by the end of December 2025 in order to not be counted as late with submitting the next plan. And so the gray bar here was the initial amount of buffer zone that we have built in into the timeline in case any unexpected scenarios come up that require us to adjust our schedule. So this is the timeline as it stands today, but happy to answer any questions or open up the floor, Dan, if you all wanted to talk about any concerns you might have with it.
Great, thank you. First of all, does anyone have any questions about the current timeline that Alexis has discussed? Okay, I don't see anyone raising hands. So we spoke last, oh, sorry, Ade, were you coming off? Did you have something? You're on mute, my friend. You're on, you have to unmute.
I was going to answer the question that no, I did not, but never mind.
Thank you. Fair enough. So we discussed this, I think, at the last meeting. But this timeline, I think, is problematic in the way that it coincides with the incoming new administration. Sorry, not a criticism of Alexis. I should start there. Like, thank you so much for putting this excellent presentation together. Thank you for doing that. The OGP timeline does not fit with the idea of our ability to communicate, I think, with the incoming administration. The incoming administration comes in on January 20th. It's going to take them months to hire people at the top of the administration, let alone to hire some of the more senior folks that we would need to have conversations with. And it looks like, based upon the chart, that May of 2025 is when the commitments will be finalized. I'm using the wrong, Alexis, you can correct me if I'm using the wrong language here, but like it'll be locked in, and then there would be a public comment period at that point. But we wouldn't have, as the Federal Advisory Committee, an opportunity to have conversations with the relevant folks at the agencies, because many of those relevant folks at the agencies either won't be hired, or they won't know what their remit is, or if they know what the remit is, they won't know what came before. It's just going to take them time to get organized. So I think that it may make sense to try to push this timeline backward by a couple of months, so that we actually have an opportunity to have a conversation with the incoming folks, and not merely to throw something over the wall and hope it sticks. I want to turn to Dan York for a minute. Dan, I apologize for putting you. Oh yeah, will you put the timeline back on the screen, please, and thank you. Dan, could you talk about this from your perspective as well? I'd be interested in what thoughts you might have.
Sure, absolutely. So you are correct. So having talked to the OGP support unit, being 1 day late, that is to say, if we were to release NAP6 on January 1st, 2026, I'm trying to get my days right, my years right there. It's the same contrary to process letter as if you're 360 days late, right? 364 days late. After 1 year of not being in compliance, the U.S. government or any member government would go under review for removal from the Open Government Partnership. So that if the U.S. government were to delay its release of NAP6, we would get the contrary to process letter, and then we would have 1 year after that to produce it before we'd be submitted under review.
That's right, and just I'm looking to you for your expertise as a federal employee. Can you express a view as to whether we would have folks to engage? Like, when do you think we'd actually have folks to engage with inside the agencies to actually engage in a co-creation process?
Certainly. So it's difficult to predict exactly, right? Every administration does their process a little bit differently in terms of appointments and confirmations through the Senate. I imagine most folks on the call can say that generally speaking, there's a series of appointments that happen relatively quickly. There's others that happen relatively slowly. Some aren't appointed for some time after the initial after inauguration on January 20th of next year. So it's hard to say with certainty when those folks would be available. However, it is likely that many of them will be appointed in the first few months, right? At least at the very executive leadership at the top of each agency's pyramid. So you're talking March, April, May-ish is likely, although it's hard to say who will be appointed when, and then when the non-confirmed appointments will be made as well, right? So there's a series of appointments that need to go through Senate confirmation and others that do not. So those lower level folks would probably be the ones that the committee are most likely to work with, lower level, in that they're appointed but not confirmed. Would probably be working with to help draft the commitments as well as their staff. And I think that's what you're referring to. Would be that above SES but below confirmation level.
Right. So just to repeat back, make sure I'm hearing it. The non-confirmation, the above SES non-confirmation folks probably won't even like get the keys to their office until April or May or potentially later. Is that
Yeah, it's likely depending, again, some appointments are made. There's what, like some 12,000, 18,000 appointments that are made, something like that. Some happen more quickly than others, right? So it's possible for me to say when any one spot will be filled, or even which spots will be filled for those positions that the OG-FAC wants to interface with.
Right.
Because certainly you're not concerned with all appointments throughout the federal government.
That's right. And then it will presumably it will take some time for them to get up to speed in terms of what they've done before and start to work through their priorities. So like, even if you have the keys to your office, it's going to take some time to actually understand what your priorities are. Is that a fair assessment as well?
I think that's likely, yes.
Okay. And this contrary to process letter, it's just a letter saying you blew the deadline, but you still have a year to do this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's the gist of it. There are circumstances under which Mexico did it relatively recently, where they decided, they worked with their multi-stakeholder forum, and put out a contrary process letter that is paraphrased to say, we know we're going to be contrary to process. We're still working on a thing for all these other really good reasons. In their case, it actually was a change in administration as well.
Yeah.
So you still get the letter, but it's not as mean, right?
It's not ominous.
Right. It's not as ominous because they were able to inform their civil society and their the OGP support unit of their intent to be contrary to process.
Right. And in that case, it sounded like the Mexican government and their multi-stakeholder, the civil society, let's say, collaborate together or at least had some sort of communication where they made clear that this delay was not unilateral. It was that there was agreement that it made sense to do it. Am I describing that right? Like,
yeah, I would have to go back and read the letter. But I believe that was the gist. At the very least, the reason for the delay was a change of the Mexican administration.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in a similar circumstance with the change of the U.S. administration.
Exactly.
Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take the graphic off the screen just for a moment, if that's all right. Oh yeah, Kristen, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to put out there kind of another approach that like we may not need to slow down or wait for all the people to, get the keys to their castle and bearings and all of that. If we have the top cover and like, from the top. And when we did the NAP, I think it was a NAP 4, that was under the Trump administration, we had the White House support and that top level one. So it occurs to me, like, rather than slowing ourselves down, another approach could be to run full steam ahead and then make sure we dot our I's, cross our T's, and we have the top cover from the very top. And, hopefully we can get those meetings with people who come in at the cabinet level or, the White House level earlier than later. And then as long as you have that alignment at the top, let the other ones sort out on the timeline they're going to, and just put that out there rather than us slowing ourselves down, because I can imagine that, that if we have the top cover, then, and it's directionally what we're doing and the commitments are aligned to that, then maybe we wouldn't need like every single layer, but just an alternative approach if we want to keep pushing ahead. But yeah.
Yeah, so for my inclinations, like, I think we should push ahead, But I think that for most of what we want to do, like there may be others that have great relationships with the incoming transition in the Trump administration. I don't, you know, we haven't had a chance to talk about that as a group. But looking at the timeline, I think that it's going to be challenging to have everything wrapped up by the end of May. And I suspect the incoming administration may have, you know, we know they've got the DOGE stuff, but they may have other priorities. I think I have a suggestion here about like what we should do, but before I offer it, I can see Suzanne wants to weigh in as well. And I want to give her a chance before I make the suggestion.
Hi, everybody. I just like to say I don't like the idea of getting a contrary to process letter. I don't sort of going forward with that as a plan is, you know, if that happens, fine, but you know, I would like to avoid that at all possible. And I don't know the current policies with the OGP, but in the past, you have been able to ask for extensions. So that might be something we could look into if we felt like that's what was needed.
Yeah, I did ask the OGP support unit about an extension, and their answer was they don't do such things anymore. That 1 year gap between the end of an app and the beginning of an app is in fact the extension, that ideally you have all the naps sort of back to back. But that they in talking to them as early as last week, that they said we couldn't ask for an extension, that you would just get the contrary to process letter.
Yeah, that's unfortunately my understanding as well. So with that, I think you know, I don't know how easy or difficult it would be for the GSA side with respect to pushing back the process, but I think that it would make sense for us as the Federal Advisory Committee, given the fact that the whole point of this is to create a plan in consultation with, you know, for civil society and the executive branch to create a plan in consultation with one another and for us to facilitate that process. And like that, there won't be people there to be able to do that with. So we'd basically like be lobbing things over the wall without knowing whether they would land properly. That we should request that GSA or the U.S. government plan on submitting the NAP, but push the process back by 3 months. That means that the U.S. will receive a contrary to process letter because it will be late. But if we do this in concert with them, then that will provide top cover for the political folks in doing that. It won't push it back indefinitely, so it won't be the end of 2026, but it would be with the goal of finishing up by like March of 2026. And that way we'd actually be able to talk to the incoming administration folks to see what their preferences are. I'm sure this is a controversial idea, but I don't see other ways of actually having a productive conversation with the executive branch. But with that, let's hear from the executive branch. No, I'm just kidding. Carol, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I would just say I think I'm outright opposed to the idea of trying to build a timeline which would lead to a contrary to process letter. Generally, you know, now that we're on the steering committee, I think anyone getting this letter would undermine their credibility on these issues and certainly their leadership in OGP. Granted, there's many reasons why you might get a letter. I think we've got a good reason, having a administration transition and all of these sort of complications that arise with that logistically and administratively. But also, I mean, the idea of getting a contrary to process letter might also it might not be a motivating thing for leadership in any of these agencies. If it's a given that we're going to be contrary to process anyway, it might sort of backfire. It might not light a fire under either leadership or working level folks to be doing this work, or at least to do it in any urgent way. So I think that it would do more harm than good to what we're trying to do here. Over.
Thank you for the comment. Charlie.
Yeah, I would just want to make sure that I understand the sort of the context and bigger picture around what we're talking about here. So we, the advisory committee, just received a presentation on the planned timeline for developing and publishing the next national action plan, right? And at this point, we are, it sounds like contemplating a recommendation to GSA regarding that timeline and the potential need for consideration of the change in administration. And again, circling back to some of the things we talked about earlier with respect to how do we evaluate these ideas, right? Some of the things that I heard come out of that were feasibility, right? And also having a package of commitments that is tied to a set of well-defined reforms, right? And so if we don't have some direction or some idea of what the envisioned reforms are from the incoming administration or what ideas they might want to support, I do think that Daniel, the issues that you're raising are quite valid, right? We could go down some rabbit holes here just to find out that we are pulling together, like, not appropriately evaluating ideas that we want to recommend. And so I think this conversation is really helpful. I think the perspectives that are being brought to bear on it are really helpful. And I think that, you know, in the form of, I don't know if it's a formal recommendation or just advice or some consideration to GSA. These are things that we want to think about, right? And GSA, I think, has the authority to take what they're hearing on this call and come back and say, based on the feedback that you've shared in consultation with the leadership team that we have here, this is where we're landing on it. Thank you so much for your input. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, I think so. If the Federal Advisory Committee were to move forward with making a recommendation to extend the NAP6 schedule, we would take that recommendation and then go to our leadership and ask if they agreed, and then make that proposal to OGP, right? So we would send a letter of some sort from our ministerial level, the GSA administrator, with the letter of support from the Federal Advisory Committee to the Open Government Partnership, saying, we know we're going to be contrary to process. These are all the very good reasons why. We have the support of the Federal Advisory Committee, which is a small stand-in for the multi-stakeholder forum, right? We had that discussion earlier. So that could be something that would allow both the Federal Advisory Committee to have more time to do their work, to understand what those metrics are, that they want to evaluate the recommendations, the commitments, the NAP6 commitments, with those federal folks that are not yet in their space. I don't know if Charlie, if that answered your question or not, but I tended to.
Yeah, it does. It does. To the extent that you would be taking our advice and recommendation in consideration with a final decision and potentially using it in a communication to OGP. I will say that I think that, right, we all know that the process is underway. We're about to get a briefing on input from the public. I do think that Kristen raised a really good point, which is that I don't think that we should put the brakes on doing the work that we're doing, right? I think that we should absolutely continue to move forward. I think that we should prepare ourselves to have a conversation sort of with the incoming administration as they come, whoever that person might be within the White House, and say, you know, based on where we are in the process, these are the ideas that we have. Based on a review of past national action plans, these are some ideas that we have. Based on the evolution and trends, these are some ideas that we have. What are the administration's thoughts on the national open government, the national action plan? And what are some reforms in areas that you would like to focus on? And how can we then have a conversation about how we tie some of these ideas or evaluate these ideas in that context?
Great, thank you for that comment. Kristen.
Yeah, just you know, from the discussion and what Suzanne said, you know, maybe not liking the idea of us setting ourselves up for these, you know, letters of not being in compliance, and then everything Carol said about it could backfire. The more we're talking about it, the less I like the idea of postponing the timeline. And the rationale is, you know, why make ourselves late and behind schedule with the incoming administration before they're even here. And then that will be a negative, kind of you're off on the wrong foot. You're already being defensive of like, you know, you're out of compliance and stuff. Where we do have a fair amount of information based on some of the appointments so far. I mean, in the open data, open science, open intellectual property, open source code, there's a lot of leaders in that space who are coming into government. So that's just a small niche, a tiny little portion of the whole open government portfolio. But there is information of like in signals out there of what are future priorities. And I think we can do our homework and then take the bottom up signal from civil society, from us, in the agencies, and do our best with that framing to put it forward. And I would recommend we just run full steam ahead. And if we hit walls or we get no's and get slowed down, let that be the choices in the next administration rather than us in this administration setting them up for already being behind schedule. Because we could be pleasantly surprised, and it could be radical transparency and all these disclosures and avoiding corruption. I mean, who knows? But I think that us choosing to slow down now in a different administration that will like kind of get things off to the wrong foot. I would rather run full steam ahead, give it all we got, and then if we get slowed down 6 months from now, like at least we tried,
Thank you, Ron.
I just wanted to indicate I agree wholeheartedly with Kristen's ideas just now, because that what she was saying was bothering me from the beginning of the delay conversation. I think we know what our task is going to be difficult enough to focus on what it is we want to accomplish without up front saying we're not going to get it done, timely. So I just wanted to agree with Kristen.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in? Josh.
We could potentially delay the early part of the calendar, but keep that deadline there, right? So maybe it would be good if we can talk about that possibility also.
Yeah, that's right. So GSA folks, half of the year is devoted to responding to this process. Is there a way to condense the amount of time that's required so that we have more time to engage in formulation?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, we can't do much about when appointments are made. I would think that having more time with agency folks would be beneficial to the Federal Advisory Committee. I also think getting out there early and letting folks know the intentions and the reasons why is valuable. Like I can't speak to who the next GSA administrator will be. I can't speak to the next series of GSA leadership. I know we currently have a GSA administrator who would likely sign a letter to OGP. But I don't know who comes next, right? If the Federal Advisory Committee wanted more time to do their work, not to stop their work, but to stand up the committee, to find the right metrics, to make sure they have the right input, have the right agency leadership, this would be a good time to do that, because we currently have leadership that would be willing to support making it work. If not, that's fine as well. We'll certainly make it work. I do think it will be a lot of work for the committee between now and May to put all that together. But again, it's really what the committee wants to do.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Josh, is your hand still up? Okay. Would someone help Josh put his hand down? Alexis.
Great, thank you. I would just add to that in response to your question, Josh, a lot of what we have planned for sort of that second half of the timeline is activities that would enable us to do a reasoned response and to have more opportunities for the public, civil society and agencies to engage. So what we've planned is, releasing RFIs, releasing the draft, having that out for a certain amount of time, and then having various listening sessions where we can solicit additional feedback, responding to all of that. So That timeline is sort of based on our best guesses and assumption of best practices for how long those activities should take. If we wanted to shrink that, that would mean less time for the RFI, less time for draft review, that sort of thing. So I don't want to say whether or not that's possible, just to help everyone understand the specific activities we see as part of that phase of the timeline.
Thank you. Was there a follow-up question, Josh, or did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah,
so-
I just want to reiterate that if I can, like, we had planned for the draft NAP to be out for, greater than 30 days for public comment. Like, we could shrink that and give the public less chance to comment, which would give you more time. But that's sort of contrary to what the purpose of the thing is, right?
Yeah.
White House leadership at the into the fall of next year will need time to review and approve the NAP. Not really much opportunity to make that shorter. There was talk of idea scale earlier that GSA is looking into. If you wanted to collect ideas via idea scale and have time to incorporate them and have time to meet with agency leadership to see whether those ideas are feasible or not, like, where in the timeline would that happen? And so I have concerns about the committee being able to meet, both do open government and get it done by May. But again, as the committee members, if you feel you can, then I'm certainly not one to object.
Yeah. So let me just sort of say from my perspective, we're not going to have our subcommittees formed until, if we're lucky, in February, maybe in March. So it's going to take time. So like, we won't know our rubric. It will be tough for us to know who to talk to in the administration, because there won't be people in the administration to speak with for the most part. A lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of like building recommendations is finding out what the problem is on the government side. So we want you to do X, and government says, well, we'd like to do X too, but we can't do it for 1, 2, 3. And you have a conversation about, well, how can you get there? My concern is that we're going to go forward with a bunch of things. With a bunch of recommendations without having any means testing against the government folks to see whether this actually aligns with what they would want to do and whether it is something that they're able to do. I don't think that we should slow down, but I'm not recommending that we slow down. We're going to be doing a year's worth of work in like 5 months, right? And GSA rules prevent us. GSA rules, the federal rules, the Federal Advisory Committee Act is implemented, prevents us from doing work largely in between when we have our regular meetings. And that is like incredibly challenging. I mean, that's why at our first meeting, I pushed for us to have monthly meetings, and for these preparatory meetings that we're pushing to the limit of like what we can do in the context of a preparatory meeting. I hate the idea of having us do all the work that we're going to do, and then because of a misalignment, because of this calendar, not generate the things that will actually like be able to go for reasons that we could have controlled for. So that's where I'm coming from on this. Oh, sorry, I apologize. There is a hand up. Kristen, please.
Yeah, I want to just build on what you were saying, Daniel, and put out maybe it's not a bad thing if we have all these commitments that are curated and ambitious things. When you look at this group, it's, largely civil society. The executive branch is in a minority, and I think that's by design and good. And this is an opportunity to say, what are, the commitments, ambitious commitments the next 2 years to improve responsiveness, transparency, accountability, and all things that make for good government. And if we have all that pulled together, and then it bounces off of things out of our control, political wins, whatever it is, that is still helpful, in my opinion, to the open government movement, because you have this delta of what the community says is important and then what the administration is doing. So it's not like it's lost work, even if it doesn't make it into the final NAP. And that's where I think some of these technologies like idea scale or ideas management could really be crowdsourcing the power of that. So yeah, there's a lot outside our control. Yes, we'll have to do a lot of socializing and really educating people of like, what is this open government partnership and national action plan? And I mean, it's going to be a lot of work in short time. And if we develop this thing and 90% of it bounces off, I would argue that's a really important data point for moving forward in the long-term vision. So, and I don't think we should be asking government for permission to publish this. Of course, we have to go through the clearances, that'll happen, but this should be civil society's working group and ability to put recommendations forward, whether or not they make it to the final NAP, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, well, just one more thing, just from my perspective, this from my point of view, NAP 4 and NAP 5 were not successful. They were not co-created with civil society. If we have another plan where civil society puts out a number of recommendations and they don't go anywhere, or it's not co-created, then like that is embarrassing for the US on the steering committee, but it also says more about like the problems in our process in doing this. My inclination is to try to buy us a little bit more time so that we can have the conversation. I know that you guys have heard me make this pitch. I think I hear most loudly Carol's concern, I think, about if there is wiggle room, then the result is going to be that this is just going to get delayed and like it's not going to light a fire under people to do things. I think there might be a way around that by saying like we suggest moving this back by 90 days, right? So there's still a deadline, although it sounds like without the contrary to process letter may be viewed as the stick that is encouraging the government to behave better. Carol, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like that's how I'm interpreting what you said. Anyway, so I'll stop there. Yeah, Carol, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, or it could get people to tune out of the process if they know we're going to get punished anyway.
Sorry, my computer froze for a second. Would you say that one more time?
Sure. Yeah, I said, or or the contrary to process letter looming over our head could get people to tune out of the process if we know we're setting ourselves up to get punished anyway.
Yeah. All right. I feel like based on the folks that have spoken up, the weight of the opinion is not with me on this one. Are there folks who are supportive of? Well, maybe we just come back to this. Why don't we can see where we are in January as well. Does that? I see Kirsten being like, that looks right. Are there others who think that maybe we should, we have to. You ought to say that again, please.
Yes, I think so. I think we should wait until January to see how things are shaping up.
Okay, and Joyce?
In the meantime, are we to continue as planned with this?
Sorry, Mike, it's glitching because of the weather here. Would you say that one more time for me, please?
I said, in the meantime, are we to continue as planned with what we have? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So my idea was not to stop our work. It's that we've got 9 months worth of work to accomplish in a 5-month period and not necessarily partners in the executive branch side to do the work with. So like that was my concern, was not to slow down. It was more that the parts of like co-creation is going to be challenging, but we'll revisit this in January. Oh, Charlie, please.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to try to concisely reiterate my point and concern, which is that I don't think that we're going to be able to properly and effectively evaluate ideas and recommendations until we have some top cover or official or whoever it is within the White House that can provide that level of perspective, insight, and support. So at some point, depending on I don't know when that person, whomever that person is going to arrive, right? And how that's going to affect this timeline. But I just want to be clear that my concern is we had a good conversation, a good readout on evaluation. And your point, Dan, is well taken. We're going to do a lot of work, right? And I just don't want to get to a point where we're starting to evaluate ideas and think through whether or not we're going to vote or support a recommendation as a committee without having that part of the puzzle in place. Because at that point, I think we're just going to be submitting, something with holes in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that to the conversation that we're going to have later, where we're going to start talking about who do we invite, there isn't going to be anybody to invite, right? If we want someone from DOJ to come and speak to us, I mean, Bobby is amazing, but like, that's it, right? Like, we don't know who else is going to be there further up the food chain who can talk to DOJ perspectives, or we don't know who's going to be there who can talk to DHS perspectives, or labor, or whoever it happens to be, or OMB perspectives. I think that we're going to make some progress, and then we're going to get stuck. And either we're going to have to switch gears and do something else, or we're going to put out something that is not tied to what is actually possible, because we won't be able to evaluate for fit and likelihood of success. I think that that's going to be really challenging. I can see that it looks like folks are not with me on like asking for a delay, at least the folks that have spoken up. I think that we're going to have to make that decision sooner or later, because we're going to run out of runway in terms of the ability to have people to engage with the administration. And who knows if we'll have, if we have an acting GSA administrator and not an actual GSA administrator, we may not have a partner with to write a letter asking for the delay, which is an issue. And I think that there's more political cover that's provided if the outgoing GSA administrator asks for the delay, then the new administrator is going to be loath to take the hit. So like, I think that we are missing an opportunity to provide some top cover from that perspective. So I think that waiting is not great. That making the request now is better than making the request later. But I'm not sure that everyone agrees with me. Charlie.
Yeah, Daniel, I will say that I personally am somewhat ambivalent on whether this we choose to recommend to GSA that they pursue the option of requesting a letter or not. I will say that much. And I'll also say, I think ultimately GSA is going to have the opportunity and the authority to make that decision, right? And regardless of whether or not we provide a formal recommendation on it or not, Daniel and the team have had the benefit of hearing the different perspectives, which is why we exist, on the pros and the cons of moving forward. And I'll be personally very excited to hear in January what GSA has decided on this point.
That's great. Thank you. Anybody else wish to weigh in? Okay. In that case, I'm going to move on, unless there are any objections. Joyce.
My question is, we still have, irrespective of what the new administration does, we still have to produce the deliverable by December, right? Or is that going to be scrapped?
So the administration is going to have to produce a deliverable by December. We are going to have to make our final recommendations in advance of May, because those recommendations will then have to be incorporated, and even that's running late. Like those recommendations will have to be incorporated by the GSA into. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on then to Alexis for the high-level overview of the NAP RFI, please.
Sure. If someone could pull up the slides, please. And I will make this lightning fast because I know you have other agenda items, and then offer, if you're interested, Yvette Gibson and I would be happy to come back at a future meeting to talk about the RFI responses more in depth. So I'm giving a high-level overview of what we heard in the comments to our NAP6 RFI. If we could go to the next slide, please. Great. So just as background, to familiarize everyone with this, the purpose was to solicit ideas from the public that could help inform what is put together for the 6th NAP. The comment period lasted 61 days, September 12th through November 12th. And if you want to read the RFI language itself, along with the comments you received, you can do so at the link you see on the screen. We gave folks in the RFI 4 guiding topics to help them when they were thinking about what they wanted to respond with. Those were asking for any problems they identified that could potentially be solved with open government principles, examples of existing work we could look to that might be able to be built off of, innovative approaches that could be examples or inspiration, and then suggested resources and recommendations. We also provided them with the 10 themes you see on the table on the right. These are the themes that come from the OGP challenge going on. We provided this as a proposed framework to ensure that the suggestions people sent in were directly related to open government topics. And just one note here, the themes OGP uses, one of them is gender and inclusion, but for the purposes of being able to analyze the comments we received, we are going to be referring to that one as equity and inclusion, just making it a little broader.
Alexis,
Yes.
I apologize. I'm
Yes.
just looking at the time. We're gonna get, would you mind just, I know you've got 1 or 2 key slides. Would you just hit those and then we're gonna move on? Is that okay?
Sure thing.
I apologize for running out of time.
No worries at all. And again, can definitely come back at another time as well. If we want to hit the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So we received 51 responses, 47 of those were able to be posted online. 23 of those comments were from orgs, 19 from individuals, 4 from coalitions, and 1 anonymous. Based on our analysis, we found there were about 140 individual commitment recommendations that were proposed. And that means that it was something specific, so not general like increased public participation, but saying this is a problem, we think this is a potential way of solving it. Next slide, please. This slide shows the most commonly represented themes. Access to information was way at the top, along with the 4 others were included. So this shows, for instance, 25 of the 47 comments referenced access to information in some way. And then next slide, if you would. And then the 5 least represented. And so you can see the bottom ones only had a few comments that discussed them at all. And I think one of them actually, the comment came from our listening session, in fact, not a submitted comment. Next slide. And I will not go through these, but for your awareness, we have included summaries of the responses we received in terms of the 10 different topic areas. So you are welcome to look through these and see what some of the most common ideas people brought up or the challenges they saw, essentially the topic areas that they think we should focus on. So there are 10 slides, one for each of them. I will not go through those, but you can see all of the responses online on regulations.gov. And with that, Dan, let me pass it back to you.
Wonderful. I am so sorry to cut you short.
No worries.
So I'm going to go very quickly through the remainder of the agenda. Some of these things that we put a fair amount of time on, I can do very quickly. One is future presentations to the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. Unless folks disagree, I'd like to invite the GSA Secretariat and also the civil society orgs from who wrote the Blueprint for Accountability to come and present in January on what GSA's findings are and what the multi-stakeholder process that civil society has found. And then in the future, for future folks, I'd like to invite, I will learn how to speak today, the FOIA Advisory Committee, maybe when they're organized, the folks from Congress, so from House Oversight and Senate HISYAC potentially. When government gets ready, maybe in March, hear from OMB or the Justice Department or other folks, and also to solicit folks for recommendations for individual presenters on themes. Like I'd love to hear from John on public participation from our little group. But for now, for January, it would be the GSA Secretariat and the Blueprint for Accountability. Kirill.
Hi. I will start by saying I think that it's a great idea to have these experts come and present to us in some way, shape, or form. I think you've identified really good experts too. I just wonder if, given the sort of time crunch that we're under, if it's more appropriate to try and have a sort of preparatory meeting structure where they're presenting to us at that, so that we can retain as much time for these full-on FAC meetings to handle the things that we need to handle so that we can stay on track in terms of producing recommendations and working towards NAP 6. Over.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I think that for the GSA Secretariat and the civil society, like those are the two that are most relevant in terms of like providing ideas for things that we should be looking at. And that's probably something that is best done in the January meeting in that public forum. If GSA is able to get the subcommittees going in time, then we can take the remainder and have like a parallel track process. With that, I think that does that work? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So I'm going to ask two things. One, unless there's objection, I'm going to go ahead and work with Arthur and Dan to get the GSA Secretariat and the blueprint for accountability folks to come in and invite them to speak in January. Is there any objection to that? Great. There was a second part to that. I don't remember what the second part is. All right, doesn't matter. Oh, if folks have recommendations for other folks that we should invite to come and speak, either at the full committee or at the subcommittees when they're established, I'll send an email asking you to email me those recommendations, and I'll try to organize them so that we can line it up with the assistance or the collaboration of GSA so that that can work. All right, one agenda item knocked off. Final one before we get to public comments. And don't worry, my closing remarks will be just the words thank you. I'm trying to figure out how we can get more work done in the various periods of time. One of the big issues that we have is that we're not able to either collaboratively draft items or to show our work in a public facing spreadsheet. We're only allowed to have those things be live during the course of our meetings. But in reading the Federal Advisory Committee Act, the GSA rules, and elsewhere, I am going to ask the GSA if it is possible to have what is in effect an ongoing meeting that lasts for 12 months that takes place in a shared Google document that will be publicly accessible so that anyone in the public would be able to see it but not to comment on it. That we would be able to comment on it, that the history of all of our comments would be publicly available so that people can see that, so they are able to engage in real-time participation. And that if there are public comments, they can be sent into the ogfac@gsa.gov. There's probably, I assume that the lawyers at GSA are not going to love this because this is a novel approach. But I think that having something where we can have what is an open meeting, because this would be an open meeting where we can all participate, where the public can participate and watch what we're doing, that is appropriately secure on a technology that we've used before, is an approach that may be able to do this. Yes, we would need to put a notice in the Federal Register, so it'd be a Federal Register notice with in the register with link to where you can find the Google Doc and how you can send it. Like basically we are doing what would be the equivalent of an online video meeting, but it's an online meeting where we'd all be in a shared Google Doc or a shared spreadsheet. This is really weird. Like, I don't think it's ever been done before. Maybe not be able to do it, but like, I think that everybody's present all the time is how I think quorum would work. So everybody's present all the time, and it's real time because you can see the history of what everyone's been doing. So there isn't like, if you step away, well, you're still you're always connected, so you're always in the meeting. So we always have a quorum. The question is going to be, yes, and we also would not be voting in the document, right? It would be so that we can deliberate, so that we can like, here's my ideas, I'm going to put them together. Here's my comments on this thing, so that we haven't, so that when we come together, we don't have to go like, you don't have to watch me type something into a Google Doc because that's crazy. So that's the idea. So I'm going to work with Arthur and Dan York to see if we can do this. No idea if this will be successful. But we should try, right? Like, just like our first meeting was publicly available when they don't usually do that, we'll try here as well. And I'm hopeful that with the help of GSA's lawyers and other folks, that maybe we will be able to find a way to make this successful. So with that, we will go to public comments. To members of the public, I'm sorry that we're getting to you 18 minutes later than we hoped, but I did just cover 30 minutes of material in 2 minutes, so I'm doing my best. But before we do that, let's go to Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I don't know if you need someone to second your motion, but I do want to say that I really love the idea, right? And I think that it's in the spirit of the reason why we have the Federal Advisory Committee Act, right? This is the idea that we are doing work with public oversight, with the opportunity for the public to listen in and hear the conversations that we're having. And I think that everything that you described, with respect to doing the Federal Register notice, with respect to making this available to anyone who wants to pop in and see the conversation, the fact that there is this background, maybe it hasn't been done before, but I think that it's a fantastic idea. And I do think that it's in the spirit of the law and the reason that that law was passed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And actually, let me just stay on that for one more second. I'm gonna, so that this is an official request of the advisory committee, I apologize for doing this unanimous consent just in the interest of time. And if you object, it's okay. But like, does anybody object to my engaging with the GSA to try to create this process that I just described with respect to a collaborative, an open meeting that is handled in a digital format in this way? All right, seeing no objection, it's endorsed by the advisory committee. All right, and with that, members of the public, sorry and thank you. Let's go to public comments. I'm going to hand it back to Arthur so that he can manage that process. Thank you, Arthur.
All right, thank you, Daniel. So I've looked at the attendees, and we had 4 individuals who had signed up to provide public comments, and currently I only see 2. But I'm going to start with the first name just to make sure you aren't signed on under a different name. So is Tanisha Brown? If you're here, please come off mute. Okay, I don't see you in the list. Johnny Castelli? I also don't see you in the list. I'm going to move to the next person, which is Colin McNamara. Your time to speak is now. Colin, I see you online. Are you able to come off mute? Okay. While Colin is working on that, we'll come back to you, Colin. Stephen Buckley.
Yes, I'm off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
State your name.
Okay, I got a clock 2 this time. Thank you very much. Yes, so I guess since I might be the only speaker, I don't get the whole 30 minutes, huh? Yes, Steve Buckley. I'm the liaison to the U.S. Open Government liaison to the U.S. chapter of the International Association for Public Participation. However, I'm just speaking today on my own, in my own voice. I'm not speaking on behalf of them because I've just learned what I want to say. I've just learned in the past few hours. First thing I would say is that it would be very helpful if in the invitation to these meetings to speak and so forth and so forth, to have the agenda of what you're going to speak, including the bullet point, the whole packet. My small town where I live, they include the agenda, the information packet. I see the same thing that everybody else, that including our select board, our city council, so to speak, same thing that they get. So it should not come as a surprise and find out, oh, we're going to talk about this. Oh, we're going to talk about that. We can already formulate something. In fact, it would even be a, so the other part is that, yes, some kind of asynchronous type of, the idea of using the internet to have asynchronous, meaning not live conversations. That's been going on for like 30 years. So if you guys can crack that nut and figure out how to have something and use something as simple, which we had been using a Google group, which is essentially listserv, to do that, to have some moderated, some aspect so that it's not just 3 minutes at the microphone. And the other part is that I would imagine that anything that it's not clear who is in charge of what. There's like 7 different groups that you have. Now you have GSA, you have OSTP, you have OMB OIRA, you have Department of State. I don't know who is making the decisions now. Who am I writing a comment to as far as the National Action Plan? Who is it? Who are these people? Who are the decision makers? Who am I trying to reach? And so forth. So that's the main thing. So anything that makes this whole process clear to somebody, even somebody as involved as I am, if you can't make it clear to me, then transparency is this is not the right model. You're not modeling the behavior you want to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McNair. I'm sorry, Mr. Buckley. And I am looking at the list. I do not see Mr. McNair. I just want to make sure I did not miss you. So with that, I think those are all of the public comments that we have that are in line to speak to us today. So I'll turn it over to Dan for his closing remarks. Dan Schuman.
Thank you. Yep, thank you, everyone. Members of the public and otherwise send comments to ogfac@gsa.gov. We'll meet again in January. We'll do all the things that we talked about. I'll be in touch by email. Thank you all. Oh, sorry, John, I see you have an intervention.
Yes, just a comment. I remain hopeful that the incoming administration is no stranger to the development of OG initiatives. I mean, we have a shared history with NAP4. And I noted that 2 of the primary subject matters areas included in NAP4, in particular, data accessibility and accountability themes, mesh well with what Alexis presented in the RFI overview, access to information. And so as far as engagement, I do acknowledge your direction, as we move forward, that we might wish to consult with stakeholders and consult with DFO and staff to hear from these interested parties, especially persons who have already worked in the development of NAP4, GSA, OMB, DOJ, HHS, and other agencies, and build on the advisories contained in the Seize the Moment report, as well as your mention of bootstrapping a better process. So I remain hopeful, especially in the areas of engagement. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Handing it back to Arthur to close us off on time. Arthur?
Thank you, Daniel. I'd like to extend my gratitude to all of our presenters, the attendees, stakeholders for joining us today, including those who provided oral public comments. At this time, if you indulge me, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Ms. Denise Ross, the Deputy U.S. Chief Technology Officer at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, who will be transitioning to the private sector at the end of next week after 3 impactful years at the White House. Here at GSA, we extend our deepest appreciation for her steadfast support of open government. For those who don't know, Ms. Ross played a pivotal role in the development of the 5th U.S. Open Government National Action Plan, the transition of open government initiatives to GSA, and the establishment of this Federal Advisory Committee. Her dedication and vision have significantly advanced transparency, civic engagement, and accountability. Her expertise, leadership, and collaboration have been invaluable, and we are profoundly grateful for her contributions. On behalf of all of us at GSA, thank you, and we wish you the very best in your next chapter. And with that, we bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your time and participation. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we are now adjourned.
And many thanks to the ASL interpreters.
Yes.
Absolutely.